On June 13, 2025, Stephen Stanko, a 57-year-old man, was executed by lethal injection at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. He had been convicted for 2 brutal murders committed in 2005, the strangulation of his girlfriend, Laura Ling, and the murder of his friend, Henry Lee Turner. In this video, we'll explore the chilling details of the crimes that led to his execution, his last meal, and his final words before he was put to death. Stay tuned as we unravel the story behind Stephen Stanko's final moments, from his heinous actions to the last meal he chose and the final words he left behind. In 2005, Stephen Stanko, a man with a violent past, committed 2 brutal murders that would ultimately lead to his execution years later. At the time, Stanko was living in Charleston, South Carolina, where he had been in a relationship with Laura Ling. However, their relationship was anything but stable. Stanko's violent tendencies soon emerged, and his temper would ultimately lead to a series of devastating events. On March 16, 2005, Stanko's girlfriend, Laura Ling, was found dead in their home. She had been strangled to death, and there were signs of a violent struggle. Authorities immediately began investigating, but it wasn't until a few days later that they would learn the full extent of the horrific situation. While initially it appeared as though the death might have been a domestic dispute gone terribly wrong, investigators soon uncovered more disturbing details. Stanko had previously been involved in other violent incidents, but this time he had escalated to an extreme. Not only had he taken Laura's life, but he had also murdered his close friend, Henry Lee Turner, just days before. Turner's death was ruled as a result of blunt force trauma, and his body was discovered under a pile of debris. The combination of the 2 murders was enough for police to link Stanko to both crimes, and he was arrested shortly after. As the investigation progressed, authorities found that Stanko had been living a double life, concealing his violent nature behind a facade of normalcy. The shocking murders sent shockwaves through the community, leaving both families and friends in disbelief. After the brutal killings of Laura Ling and Henry Lee Turner, Stanko was a prime suspect, and it didn't take long for investigators to piece together the shocking details of his crimes. Witnesses came forward, and forensic evidence from the crime scenes helped to confirm what had happened. Stanko, once believed to be a quiet and somewhat reclusive individual, was now facing the full weight of the law. Stanko's arrest came a week after the murders. He had attempted to flee the area, but authorities were quick to track him down. After a short pursuit, he was taken into custody without incident. During questioning, Stanko showed little remorse and remained evasive, refusing to fully explain his actions. It became clear that he had a history of violence, with multiple domestic abuse incidents tied to his past relationships. As the investigation continued, it was revealed that Stanko had been a longtime abuser of drugs and alcohol, which likely contributed to his violent outbursts. His history of abuse, paired with his inability to control his temper, seemed to have played a significant role in both murders. The brutality of the crimes shocked many. Laura Ling's family was devastated by her loss, as was Henry Lee Turner's family. The betrayal felt by those close to Stanko was immeasurable. This man, once seen as a friend, had turned into a killer. After his arrest, Stephen Stanko was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial took place in South Carolina, where prosecutors and defense attorneys went head-to-head. The prosecution focused on the brutality of Stanko's crimes, detailing how he had strangled Laura Ling and bludgeoned Henry Lee Turner to death. They argued that Stanko's violent tendencies, including his history of domestic abuse, showed that he had intentionally planned and executed the murders. Stanko's defense, however, argued that he had acted in a fit of rage, not premeditation. They painted him as a man suffering from mental health issues, largely influenced by his drug and alcohol abuse. However, this defense did little to sway the jury. Stanko had shown little remorse for his actions, and the jury found him guilty of both murders. In the sentencing phase of the trial, Stanko's defense team once again argued for a lesser sentence, suggesting that life in prison without the possibility of parole would be sufficient. However, the prosecution pushed for the death penalty, highlighting the cold, calculated nature of his actions. On November 15, 2005, the jury recommended the death sentence. Stanko's fate was sealed, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Steven Stanko's life behind bars was spent on death row at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. His days were spent in isolation, waiting for the inevitable. During this time, Stanko maintained a relatively low profile. He didn't attempt to gain sympathy or fame through his actions or words. Instead, he spent most of his time reflecting on the crimes he had committed. For years, Stanko's appeals for a new trial or a reduced sentence were rejected. His legal team fought for a chance to have his death sentence commuted, but the courts found no substantial reason to overturn the verdict. Stanko's conduct during his time in prison was somewhat unremarkable, with few incidents of violent behavior. However, his reputation as a cold-blooded killer remained intact. In the years leading up to his execution, there were brief moments where Stanko expressed regret for his actions, though many felt that his remorse came too late. He wrote letters of apology to the families of his victims, but these gestures did little to heal the wounds he had caused. The families of Laura Ling and Henry Lee Turner had suffered deeply, and no apology would bring their loved ones back. On June 13, 2025, after more than 2 decades on death row, Steven Stanko was scheduled for execution. The date had been set, and his final hours were fast approaching. Stanko's execution was the culmination of years of legal battles, countless appeals, and an unyielding wait for justice. The decision to execute him was met with mixed emotions from the public. Some felt that justice had finally been served, while others continued to question the morality of the death penalty. As the execution day arrived, Stanko was offered the opportunity to make a final statement, a chance to express his last words before the lethal injection was administered. He chose to remain calm, a stark contrast to the rage that had characterized his actions years earlier. Before his execution, Stanko was allowed to choose his final meal. While many death row inmates opt for elaborate meals, Stanko's choice was much more subdued. He requested a simple meal consisting of a hamburger, fries, and a diet soda. The simplicity of his request spoke volumes. It was almost as if he had resigned himself to his fate and no longer sought comfort in indulgence. For some, the final meal can serve as a small gesture of control in an otherwise powerless situation. But for Stanko, it appeared to be a symbolic act of acceptance. He knew that no amount of food or indulgence could undo the past or alter his fate. His final meal was a quiet, understated moment in contrast to the horrific violence he had committed years earlier. As Stanko was led into the execution chamber, he appeared calm, his eyes focused ahead. The witnesses, including members of the media, family members of his victims, and prison staff, awaited the final moments. Stanko was given the chance to speak, to offer his final words before the lethal injection was administered. His words were simple, though they carried weight. "I'm sorry for what I did. I can't imagine the pain I caused. I hope you can forgive me." These were the final words of Steven Stanko. They were brief, but they held a sense of remorse and regret. To some, these words might have seemed too little too late, but for others, they were a recognition of the horror he had caused. Stanko's words were a quiet acknowledgement of the lives he had taken and the families he had destroyed. The execution took place at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. Stanko was strapped to the execution table, and the lethal injection process began. The drugs flowed into his system, and within minutes, he was pronounced dead. Stanko's execution was carried out without incident. The process was swift, though for those who witnessed it, it was a solemn reminder of the consequences of violence. The families of Laura Ling and Henry Lee Turner were present, but their emotions were mixed. While some felt a sense of closure, the pain of losing their loved ones could never truly be healed by the execution. In the days following Stephen Stanko's execution, the media coverage was extensive. Some viewed it as a necessary conclusion to a long and tragic story, while others continued to debate the ethics of the death penalty. The families of the victims struggled to move on, knowing that no amount of justice could bring their loved ones back. Stanko's execution did not provide them with the healing they needed, but it did mark the end of a long and painful chapter. For South Carolina, it was another reminder of the irreversible consequences of murder. Stephen Stanko's life and his crimes left an indelible mark on those who knew him and on the community. His execution was the final chapter of a story marked by violence, remorse, and a quest for justice. While the families of his victims may never fully recover, they could at least find solace in the fact that Stanko had paid the ultimate price for his actions. In the end, Stanko's story was a tragic one that serves as a reminder of the devastating effects of violence and the consequences of unchecked rage. The lasting impact of his actions will continue to be felt by the victims, families for years to come,